On October 20th, 2025, in a quiet town in Texas, a man stood alone at the intersection of Broadway and Main Street, holding a sign. At first glance, it didn't seem like anything unusual. Just another person exercising their freedom in public. But within minutes, that simple act would trigger a chain of events that would raise serious questions about law enforcement, free speech, and the limits of government authority. The man was 39-year-old Winston Knowles, the creator behind a YouTube channel known for documenting police interactions. But this wasn't random. He had come prepared. He positioned cameras around the area, making sure every angle was covered. This wasn't just a protest, it was an experiment. Winston held multiple signs, each with different messages. Some were provocative. Some contained harsh language. And some were designed to make people uncomfortable. It didn't take long for people passing by to react. Within minutes, calls started pouring into the Winsboro Police Department. Concerned citizens reported a man standing in public displaying vulgar signs. To them, it was offensive. To Winston, it was protected speech. As the calls stacked up, officers were dispatched to the scene. Along with them came a code enforcement officer. When they arrived, they immediately focused on the signs. Before even fully engaging, one officer suggested that Winston was trying to bait them, implying that this entire situation was a setup designed to provoke a reaction. And in many ways, it was. As officers approached, Winston didn't resist. He didn't run. But he didn't comply either. He moved calmly, maintaining space, keeping control of the interaction. The officers told him to stop. He questioned why. They told him his signs were a problem. He asked under what law. Right from the start, this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. The officers explained that the signs were considered a nuisance. They pointed to city ordinances, claiming that displaying vulgar or offensive messages in public was not allowed. Winston listened, but he didn't accept it. He refused to hand over the signs. He refused to stop. And instead, he began asking questions. Specific questions. Legal questions. The code enforcement officer attempted to explain the ordinance, stating that signs containing obscene or disturbing language could not be displayed. But there was a critical issue. That ordinance was primarily designed to regulate commercial signage, not individual expression. Not protest. Not political speech. But in that moment, the officers treated it as if it applied universally. As the conversation continued, tension slowly built. The officers became more direct. They warned Winston that if he didn't comply, he could be cited. Possibly even arrested. They mentioned disorderly conduct. Public nuisance. Violations of city code. But every time they made a claim, Winston pushed back. Calmly. Clearly. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't aggressive. But he wasn't backing down either. At one point, Winston made it clear, he was willing to accept a ticket, but he was not going to stop expressing himself. That statement changed the tone of the encounter. It showed the officers that compliance wasn't coming, and it showed that Winston understood the situation well enough to stand his ground. The officers then shifted their approach. They tried to explain that the issue wasn't just the language, but also the location. They claimed he couldn't display signs in the intersection. Winston countered that he was on the sidewalk. They pointed to invisible boundaries. He questioned their definitions. Back and forth it went, with neither side willing to concede. Then came another claim, one that surprised even Winston. An officer told him that he needed a permit to film. That recording in public required authorization from the city. But Winston immediately challenged that idea. He questioned whether such a requirement even existed. Because generally, recording public officials in public spaces is considered protected activity. Despite that, the officer doubled down. But the argument didn't hold. There was no clear explanation. No solid legal backing presented in the moment. And Winston continued filming. As the interaction dragged on, the officers became more focused on ending it. They reiterated that the signs were not allowed, that complaints had been made, that people were offended. But offense alone is not a crime. And Winston knew that. Eventually, the officers made a decision. They detained him. Not fully under arrest, but not free to leave either. They guided him toward a patrol vehicle and began the process of issuing a citation. Winston continued asking questions, making sure everything was documented. He asked if he was being arrested. They said no. He asked if he would go to jail. They avoided giving a direct answer at first, then reassured him that it would likely just be a ticket. The citation was issued for violating a local ordinance, specifically tied to the content of his sign. Not because he blocked traffic, not because he caused a physical disturbance, but because of what the sign said. After receiving the citation, most people would pack up and leave. But Winston didn't. Instead, he returned to the intersection and continued holding his signs. That moment alone says a lot, because it shows this wasn't about avoiding trouble. It was about making a point. Looking back at the entire encounter, several things stand out. The officers consistently focused on the message of the signs rather than any clear, neutral violation. They referenced laws but struggled to apply them correctly. They threatened charges that didn't clearly fit the situation. And they attempted to enforce rules that may not legally apply in that context. On the other side, Winston remained calm throughout. He didn't escalate physically. He didn't become aggressive. He asked questions. He challenged authority, but did so within his rights. He understood the difference between lawful orders and questionable ones, and he used that knowledge to stand his ground. This situation highlights a much bigger issue, one that goes beyond a single interaction. It raises questions about how well laws are understood by those enforcing them, about how easily protected speech can be mistaken for illegal behavior, and about how important it is for individuals to know their rights. Because in moments like this, knowledge becomes power. And without it, situations can escalate quickly. In the end, this wasn't just about a sign. It wasn't just about offensive language. It was about the balance between authority and freedom. About where that line is drawn, and who gets to draw it. One man stood on a street corner, holding a sign. And in doing so, he turned a quiet Texas intersection into a real-world test of the Constitution. And the results speak for themselves.